It is Memorial Weekend. I am overseas in the Philippine Islands, and I did not forget this holiday. And I plan on visiting the American cemetery, World War II cemetery by nearby Fort Bonifacio in the Philippine Islands. This said, every Memorial Weekend, I remember driving this car, the U.S. Army car that is presently doing tours all around the nation, and listed are the names of all the soldiers that perished in the War on Terror. It was an honor to drive it, and I was very, very careful not to do any damage to it. And I just basically cruised it and make sure everything is a okay. God bless America. This video is dedicated to my Uncle Art, my mother's youngest brother, Vietnam, U.S. Army, 1968. And coming from you overseas in the Philippine Islands, here at my cousin's Elmo's home, and I kind of figured I should do a quick video here about the B1 Mopar that I've done years ago. This one should be very interesting because it's a low deck block, and as usual, I believe in RPM when it's a racing configuration. Torque is great, but with today's engines powering cars that are small tire with stock suspension, that's the rage today. Anybody can build a big tire car and go fast, but everybody's on a 10.5. Well, not everybody, but a lot of them, that's the rage. A 10.5 tire, maximum 28 or 29. It becomes quite challenging to try to hook up with lots of power. And usually a short stroke engine will deliver that kind of power with RPMs without overwhelming the tires off the line. And I've done years ago, in fact, more than one time, where I destroked an engine from a big inch, cubic inch Ford or Chevy, and go to a stock stroke or less. Actually, the power stayed the same because the head becomes the power equation. Flow, like they say, if it's capable of flowing an enormous amount of pressure in there towards the cylinder under boost, you're going to have a quicker engine because of the RPM potential without overwhelming the tires. Because when you have a big cubic inch turbo, small or big block, you leave the line, you blow the tires, and then you hold back on the boost and you ramp it up. By the time you get moving, you don't have the RPM potential. 4-inch stroke small block or 4.250 big block against a 4-inch stroke big block, or a 4-inch stroke small block with a 3.5, 3.6 stroke. Big difference in RPM potential. And the amazing part is you'll see the horsepower peak is higher. At the same time, the horsepower number is the same. So it plays well into a small tire chassis or configuration. And I tell you what, I've done both, and I tend to go to a short deck, high RPM configuration for impressive race-like performance. You can do that thing on the street, all right? Because you don't be dependent a little bit more on boost, because of course, when you have a short stroke combination, regardless, 4, 6, 8, what's gonna show is that torque is king on the street, but RPM takes the ultimate potential of the racetrack. And I remember years ago when we used to race against the Grand Nationals, they're displacing a 6-cylinder engine compared to our 302, all 8.2 deck then. Nobody, as far as I remember, was running a 9.2 or 9.5 deck at that time. And then when you look at the configuration, they have 2 less cylinders. But I tell you what, those Grand Nationals joined just as fast as the Mustangs were. And it hasn't really changed today, except maybe with the advent of the Coyote with those 4V heads. It's just no comparison. You're not going to compare a Windsor engine, even with Yates heads against the Coyote, if you put the displacement of the same thing, 5.0 or 5.7 or whatever. I tell you what, the overhead cam multi-valve layouts vastly superior. Okay, except maybe when and I still not really convinced that you have an SC1 on boost on a 9.5 deck, even with a big stroke, 4 inch or more, displacing 460 cubic inch or 427 cubic inch. I think, to tell you what, the Coyote still has the potential. You just got the top end breathing with a short stroke RPM potential. It is very hard to beat. So now, let me just proceed to showcase this B1 short stroke engine combination with the cam specs and stuff. And we go from there. And I'll break through and talk smack. Okay, guys? Hey, whatever I say here is not, etched in stone and stuff. It's just an opinion. Somebody else could probably prove me wrong. And hey, who knows? We're all here starting to learn. You're watching me. I'm watching everybody's questions, and we all learn from each other. This way, we can all build a better engine combination. God willing, not blow it up. All right, guys? Here you go. B1 Mopar. Here's a picture of this engine, and it is a big bore short stroke, which I will go into details later on, and it's very impressive. It's been converted to a dual turbo and eventually will be switched over to a single turbo on a throttle body with fuel injection. Not this configuration that I have that I'll show you here, the transition from a NA Pro Stock style, short deck block to a turbo, twin turbo to a single turbo with a throttle body. And follow on. It'll be interesting. Here's the intake the way it came. It's got two 1050 dominators, and of course, you know me, always with an annular discharge because the signal is so much more stronger and gives me more precise metering of the fuel, and of course, especially the response and its ability to pull from the RPM drop to the next gear and so forth and so on. Anyway, so here we're looking at two dominators, annular discharge on a CFE intake manifold. It's configured, of course, for a two carbs, and I was debating before to run a single top, single dominator, but from the way it looks like, the end cylinders will not get their same amount of air and fuel, so it might tend to cut back on the end cylinders from getting its proper amount. Now, since it's going to be turbocharged with boost, it might still be or will be a lot better. But that being said, I would prefer to have two sets of throttle body on top of this intake manifold. In fact, I might end up using a V10 uh, throttle body on top of the first four and then the other four on the back. And this engine or this throttle body would look like this. Okay, this is the V10 Ford throttle body for the um, this planned boosted B1 Mopar. The throttle bodies are not that big, but we'll see. I have to size it up and evaluate everything, but I'll show the other options that I have. This is an aftermarket unit here. Look at how much bigger the throttle plates are compared to the previous photo. So now this is decision making. Do I line them up like a tri-power layout in line with one shaft controlling the TP sensor and just continue on and spline the front and back, or should I do it sideways? As soon as I get the upper plate on the manifold made up, maybe I'll start off with wood and look at how they'd line up into the ports. You can't really make a decision until I look at it and have two plates, one sideways, front and second, or in line. Was that the cross boss layout? That might be an option. If I'm not mistaken, this is the BBK unit. So I kind of figured these are my options. See what you guys think, or post your comments, or I could just go put two big throttle bodies from the 5.0 blown application. Keep it simple. One big, 90 or 85, whatever, right to the front four and then the back four. That might be simpler. And then push the boost there. So I got to look at it. I got some throttle bodies for the 5 liter, and look at that. I kind of caught my attention with this kind of layout because it looks pretty trick. All right, as opposed to having just one throttle body or two. It's not going to work for the middle ones because the end ones are, even though it's boosted, you have kind of a difficulties trying to reach the end cylinders. So I opted for more throttle plates and spread it farther towards the center of the V configuration. Before we move on, this is the picture, two pictures of the crossbus intake manifold, and just visualize the throttle body lined up on this short deck B1 Mopar block. What do you guys think? Here's the head, and I'm showing you guys the part number for this thing. And later on, we'll talk about the flow numbers and some more improvements I got out of it. Anyway, look at it closely. Very healthy intake port. And some of the intake modifications I have outlined previous video was applied to this thing. The owner, just like he don't want to talk too much about his heads. In fact, he at least allowed me to show some of these things. But there are improvements on flow. Another 12 CFM from where I am with this thing. Okay, so and then it went up to the flow all the way to 950 or a little bit more, like 980. Okay, so there we are. Another picture of the doggone intake port. Looks pretty doggone good. So you can see it's got some angle in there. It's not a straight up and down configuration. I'll eventually do a valve train segment on when a short deck, especially with a canted valve layout or some kind of a push rod angle here. All right, it's not a straight up and down like the Yates SC1. When you have this kind of issue, and this is a significantly cut down block. Okay, the owner doesn't want me to tell how much has been cut, but when you look at there, you can see how much it's come down. When you do this, what actually happens is that the push rod tends to get even worse. Okay, when the head comes down, of course this is exaggerated. If the deck was stock deck, it's not that way. Then when the head comes down, guess what? It changes angle significantly. That's why for the longest time canted valve was indeed the superior cylinder head, but eventually at very, very high RPM, these guys turning 10 grand, 11, or some, if they care to admit, maybe a little bit more, that push rod angle is going to get drastic, and you're going to have issues with a rocker arm deflection and all that. The lifters don't like that. The push rod don't like it. There's nothing better than a straight up and down movement, and that's when you see the SC1 and some of the other new cylinder heads, Pro Kings. They don't have any cant, or if there's hardly anything discernible. You got the part number. Look at how close these two rocker arm tips get to be. All right, they get pretty doggone close, and there are no issues really, except maybe at super high lift. I have to see, because I'll give you cam specs in a bit, but anything about 900, 950 or inch lift, I will show you where we're at with this thing. Here's the configuration you're looking at. There are issues when this is about to be used for very, very high RPM, which this cylinder head is really intended for. As you look at, just like on the Fords and the Chevys, this end cylinder is only held by that center stud or bolt. Not much help. So I usually weld this one here together, put a steel spacer there, weld them together, tie them all in, all the way to the other end. But here's the issue at hand. This exhaust is going to pull out, especially on a turbo, lots of pressure. That's why a lot of people run at high boost level steel rocker, especially when you have a big exhaust valve. It's even more harder to open up the exhaust under pressure after combustion. That said, we put stainless steel or steel spacer there, and then I use a bolt that intersect all the way there and here. All right, so you lock it in place to shore up this end, and then when you weld those together, now this is all tied in. But this is always an issue on the end cylinders. Even with ZELLE TD, we end up pulling the stud or the threads out there, especially when the ports is real high. All right, so remember, that is an issue that I showed in other videos on the Fords and the big block Chevy. So another spacer there that's bolted through this end, and of course intersects the ZELLE mount right there. Hope that's clear. Oh, 1.8 rocker ratio on this thing. There's the Siamese exhaust port, as you can see. It's impressive flowing, and I'll show the flow numbers here. And hey, one thing, like I said, anchor that. This one here is already pretty doggone good. It's closer. You can pretty much support it by drilling across, but you gotta tie these things together. All right, so act like one supporting each other at high RPM. So there you go. Just like the small block Chevy, the Siamese exhaust port ends up really laying over to the valve springs, or the valve springs over the head bolts. It is really not too happy with that, but it is what it is. Not only do you have a tendency to run hot on this two Siamese exhaust port on a typical Chevy small block, this has the possibility as well. And once I torque it down, then I put the valve springs back on. All right, you can't torque it with that interference. Kind of a hassle, but it is what it is. So take note of that. You're looking at the flow numbers here, but this is years ago. As of late, I'm up to about 975, 965 lift. It's pushing roughly a little under 435. And the exhaust is pushing right about the same. It really didn't change much. I think I don't want to make it any bigger to get more flow. I think it's perfect where it's at. 298, a tad under 300. That pretty much runs similar to the Blue Thunder Ford heads that I've done. And it's quite a bit. So this is very good for boosted application, as you can see. Here's the picture of the heads. It's quite big intake valve and a fairly good exhaust valve. Compact chambers. If I remember correctly, I don't have my notes because I'm overseas. I think it's something like 47 cc combustion chambers on a 4.5-inch bore. Very impressive. Felpro 1105 is what I use here. It's up to, I think, 590 bore size. I'm sitting at 500. So this is still available. I don't know how much longer, but it's there for everybody's information. As a matter of just information to give out there, I think the cylinder head on the top, I don't remember if that was a 904 or 908, one of those numbers. And the bottom one is an aftermarket one. I believe is an Edelbrock. This too. I notice the Edelbrock has a quench pad, whereas the factory doesn't have one. If you think you need some kind of quench action, you can just buy, on a budget build, those kit black pistons have a raised portion to fill up the recess on the open chamber design. So you have some kind of quench pad to stimulate the air and fuel during the ignition process. It's not a bad idea for a budget build to have those working for you. This is a stock block. Take note of the water ports coming out of the front of the casting, and let's compare. Look at how short this block deck is at. The bolt holes for the water pump is just about uncovered or exposed. All right, so like I said, short stroke, big bore for high RPM. This is the way to go. Plus, a crankshaft with a shorter stroke is actually stronger. All right, strength wise from twisting. Lots of long stroke. The overlap between the main bearing and the connecting rod bearing is too far away, and you can start breaking cranks there. This one, we will look at the crank. It is very stout. Here is the crank, the dampener, ATI, and a Jessel cam belt or belt drive. Very impressive piece. And let's go on and look at this at a closer description. All you hardcore Mopar guys, you know the name Koffel. Here it is with a 3.38 stroke crankshaft. Go check it out. Well, here it is, 4.5 inch bore when it was NA with a 3.38 stroke. Guess how big it really is. Now the picture here is get the turbocharge combination, which is 11.5 to 1 compared to the previous one or previous picture. Imagine that. 4,500 bore with a 3,380 stroke. You got high RPM potential here. That's going to be awesome. Note the red dots right at the 4 extra head bolts to fasten this block and keep that head gasket from blowing. It's impressive. Lots of race blocks have this where the bolt comes in from underneath, basically at the valley uh, pan or lifter valley pan, should I say, and goes up to the cylinder heads. Note the piston on the right is one of the sets for nitrous on carburetors. Note the ring land position and the new piston turbo. It's even lower than that, anticipating more higher boost. Anyway, that's the key. You have to have a low ring land position so that the piston will survive. The other, I don't have the picture of the NA combination for this engine. Before I finish this, if I can find it, I will post it. The ring pack is all the way up. Here's a clear picture of the piston, and take note of how that is. The ring pack is already all the way down. I will not talk, just read and check out the specs. This is by Iskandarian Camshaft, and it works good. You can get more wilder than this if you want to boost higher, and of course, it goes hand in hand. Bigger cam, more boost. Okay, but not quite as big a camshaft as it is on an NA. But you should still give it more lift and a little bit more duration. Here's a quick pictures of the bottom end. It's a cross bolt main, aluminum block, and of course, um, it's the short deck configuration, as you can see from this last part of the picture. Look at how tough this block layout is with the cross bolt. Pretty much how come Top Fuel is dominated by Hemi blocks, as you can see from this last part of the picture. Parts that I have used. to complete the oil pump oiling system, including the oil pan. So there it is, and they're high quality and provides good pressure. I will be using GRP aluminum rods to replace this ones here. I don't trust them, and that's that. Better be sure. Since this block has been decked big time, we have issues, as you can see, with the MSD distributor. And it's best, I feel, just to run a front distributor adapter, the remote deal that everybody runs, so you don't have to run this distributor rubbing on the valve cover. Picture of the part number stamped on the back of the camshaft. This is not, should we say, a catalog part. This is a custom grind. So this is it for now. We will proceed as soon as the owner says he's ready to go. We're not feeling too well. It will be definitely throttle body, perhaps with a V10 Ford Triton, two of them in line like the Cross Boss, of course, with the injectors plummet to the sheet metal intake, and we'll go either E85 or whichever fuel he wants. All right, but I kind of figured that's the way we're gonna go with this. It's gonna go to a Fox body Mustang. Imagine that with a B1 Mopar. So it'll be great. And as soon as we get this thing running, we'll post it for everybody else to see. So expected power range, perhaps 2400 easily, without going overboard. We can go bigger on the camshaft and up the boost higher than. And if we want to step it up some more, we will push the injectors and the boost much higher. Hey, I forgot before I go. It's going to be a single turbo. The dual turbo is going to be removed or give way to a single turbo.